The experience that was had in this common course and condition tried sundry years, and that amongst godly and sober men many well evidence the vanity of the conceit of Plato's and other ancients, applauded by some of latter times, that the taking away of property and bringing in community into a commonwealth would make them happy and flourishing, as if they were wiser than God. For this community, so far as it was found to breed much confusion and discontent, and retard much employment that would have been to their benefit and comfort. For the young men that were most able and fit for labor and service did repine that they should spend their time and strength to work for other men's wives and children, without any recompense. The strong, or man of parts, had no more in division of victuals and clothes than he that was weak and not able to do a quarter the others could. This was thought injustice. The aged and graver men to be ranked and equalized in labors, and victuals and clothes, etc., with the meaner and younger sort, thought it some indignant and disrespect unto them. And for men's wives to be commanded to do services for other men, as dressing their meat, washing their clothes, etc. They deemed it a kind of slavery, neither could many husbands well brook it. Upon the upon the point of all being to have alike, and all to do alike, they thought themselves in the like condition, and as of good as others. And so, if it did not cut of those relations that God hath set amongst men, yet it did at least much diminish and take of the mutual respects that should be preserved amongst them, and would have been worse if they had been men of another condition. Let prone objects, this is men's corruption, and nothing to the course itself. I answer, seeing all men have this corruption in them, God, his wisdom, saw another course fitter for them. My friends, that was William Bradford, and this is AllMinucOne. My name is Bill. I said yesterday I would do a little Thanksgiving episode, and I'm going to cover the true origins of Thanksgiving. So, excuse my stumbling and stammering through this old English spelling here, but we have an article from NPR, or PBS, sorry, back in the day in 2012. Now, I bring up PBS because they are a very, very kind of left-wing organization. Basically, they are an arm of the Democratic Party. Imagine that. A news outlet being the arm of the Democratic Party, because that is the appropriate way. That is the way of FDR. That is what the party has been since they came back into power during the Progressive era. For several decades before that, the Republicans ruled, and the Democrats basically just tried to rig elections. Nothing's new there. Tried to stop people from voting. They don't stop people from voting now. They actually allow dead people to vote. And also illegal immigrants and other people that don't live in the state and whatever else. Excuse me. So maybe they've changed on that some. Except for they do give handouts to minorities expecting their vote now. And some other interesting things like progressive racial segregation policies, which they were against, segregating, or sorry, integrating in the past, and since then they've turned back around and decided, well, yeah, now we just need to segregate and have special spaces for everybody. But that's getting all off topic. The Democratic Party, or the Democrat Party, that is just a nightmare, folks. And they are the ones that truly have the power in all the institutions. And don't you dare listen to anything the mainstream media says about Republicans being the vile, evil ones. I'm not a fan of Republicans either, but basically they don't do anything. They don't have any cultural institutions. And with all that said, again, this is PBS. So we will get into it. This is a little interview here talking about the origins of Thanksgiving. It says, Paul Solomon says, it began Thanksgiving. We give today's post to Governor William Bradford of the Plymouth Colony, built by pious Protestant pursuits backed by profit-seeking investors. Bradford tells the story of a tough Massachusetts winter in 1623. Now, I want you to remember that because other people will date the first Thanksgiving to 1621. There was a feast and celebration in 1621. They did not have a good crop that year, though. I point this out because I'm going to bring up a Slate article. Slate is utter progressive leftist garbage, but I am going to bring up this Slate article, basically denying everything that Bradford wrote about. And we can go very easily to the interwebs and find William Bradford's writings. They are within the public domain. This is Project Gutenberg. This is to basically make all the classic manuscripts, anything of history, and put it on the interwebs. And we can go through this. It says Bradford's History of Plymouth Plantation, the original manuscript. There's a picture of the book. We can go through. There are various chapters. It talks about how the voyage is and whatever else. And then book 2 is literally dates, 1621 and 1623. So this is, I believe, the 1621 period. Well, I had this pulled up, but I just resized it, folks. So it is just how this works. But you can see there's a lot here to read, and you can easily go find this for yourself. I just want you to know there's no smoke and mirrors here. I will present you with what I got. So here, let's do this. There we go. So you can go there and look at this stuff yourself. I'm going to get back to this PBS article. So it says, Bradford tells of the tough Massachusetts winter of 1623 and how the colony barely survived, unable to raise enough food to sustain themselves. One reason he gave the rules of the colony, as laid down by the investors, specified that colonists should till their own land in common. This was the case in England, from which they migrated. Now, this is because England was still under a feudal system. Feudalism is a form of communism, folks. It is a form of socialism. It is just that the serfs till the land, and the lords essentially allow them to keep some of what they tilled, and then the rest of it has to be redistributed. This was seen as righteousness. Feudalism essentially allowed no economic mobility. That's what socialism does in general. These things have to be judged off of first principles. Am I saying the systems are the same? No. Am I saying they operate similarly? Yes. Do they cause the same effect? Yes. So it says, but the colony, perhaps desperate, seemed to have changed the rules in order to jack up productivity, allowing individual families to tend plots on their own. An early instance of the benefits of pursuing self-interest as opposed to communalism. Communalism, by the way, is a similar thing to communism. They have the same root word. Remember, the true idea of communism was not really written about until, I don't know, the 1860s, 1880s by Marx, and really most of that was Engels. But that aside, again, you need to think and see things as first principles. It's like, I say a duck is a duck, that whole thing. If you have a brown duck, he might be he might be a communist, or he might be a Nazi, depending on, the brown shirts were the Nazis. And then you might have a black duck, so maybe he's a communist, but they're still both ducks, right? They're basically the same systems, just done in different ways. I'm on record. Successful economic grand strategy entails a balance between cooperation and self-interest. Sounds like free markets. Extremes in one direction or the other are unsustainable. I don't know about that. According to Bradford, Governor Bradford, extreme communalism wasn't doing the job in Plymouth, Massachusetts. This is William Bradford himself. He said, while no supply was heard of, neither knew they when they might expect any. So they began to think how they might raise as much corn as they could and obtain a better crop than they had done, that they might not still be languished in misery. At length, after much debate of things, the governor, with the advice of the chiefest amongst them, gave way that they should set crops from labor, every man for his own particular. And in that regard, trust themselves in all other things to go in a general way as before. And so assigned every family a parcel of land according to the proportion of their number for that end, only for present use. But made no division for inheritance, and ranged all boys and youth under some families. This had very good success, for it made all hands very industrious. Interesting, when you have to provide for yourself, how suddenly you have an incentive to become industrious. Hardworking. Something socialism does not provide for. As the old Soviet joke goes, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. John Stossel showed years ago when he went to Soviet Russia that they went to a restaurant and sat there for hours because no one waited on them. Why work? Everyone's going to get paid the same. So as much more corn was planted than their ways would have been by any means the governor or any other could use. So basically, they had more than they could possibly use and save him a great deal of trouble and gave far better continent. The women now went willingly into the field and took their little ones with them and set corn, which before would allege weakness and inability, whom all compelled would have been thought great tyranny and oppression. So I believe that's what that's supposed to be. So what he's saying is these people before, they wouldn't willingly go in the field, and then the people go, oh, I'm weak, I can't do this, I don't have the ability to do it. And then here in this excerpt I read in the beginning, it literally talks about how other men were, or the younger men were complaining that the other men weren't working. There was a lot of thievery going on, which I'm going to show you some stuff about that. They felt it was a form of slavery, which because basically you're working for other people. As Abraham Lincoln said, you work and I eat. Like, this is what communism and socialism is. So back to the author here, he says, a final word. It's not all that clear that Plato, Socrates were genuinely pushing collectivism. It is quite very, very, very clear. Read the Republic, folks. What he's saying here, though, is that some scholars say, well, the Republic is one long reducto ad absurdum, meaning a reduction to absurdity, and it's basically that the sustained efforts to take an idea of a planned community to its logical conclusion. A cha- if you're looking for an apparent champion of pure collectivism, I suggest the evangelist Luke in his account of the first Christian Pentecost in Acts. Okay, well, guys, I happen to know my scripture rather well. And what happened was is that the early church, as it was growing and growing spiritually and uplifting each other and starting this great outreach all of a sudden, what they were doing is they were trying to learn and they were communing together, and they never required anyone to provide for other people. They just did. Paul, the apostle, said, if a man does not work, he does not eat. He complained about women who were busybodies, who basically, he was saying if they were widowed, don't let them be busybodies and stir up gossip and trouble. He complained about people who essentially were being lazy and would not work or do their day's labor. He himself had the proper right to request money or food because he was a teacher, he was an instructor, and he set up churches all across Asia at the time. And he himself still worked. He still labored on top of that so that no one could hold aught against him. So no one could say, well, no, why do you get to eat for free, Paul? Instead of Paul saying, well, I'm a teacher. I'm instructing you. I'm here for your spiritual welfare. Make no accusation of him. What he did is he worked anyways. So to account this and say, well, the Republic isn't really collectivism. No, it absolutely is. And you only need to read Aristotle to figure this out, because Aristotle chides Plato's Republic. And the events of Acts were literally the church just growing all of a sudden, and they were providing for the people who couldn't, and they were providing for basically those who were set up in the ministry. In the first few centuries of Christianity, no one who was within the church as a leader, a teacher, no one had a set salary. They only took donations, and most lived in absolute poverty. And that is really the example that Christ set forth. So this is just silly and absurd and whatever. It's whatever. So this is from fee.org. And I really care to read about this right here, but what's the name of the article real quick? It says, How Communism Almost Ruined the First Thanksgiving. And this was from 2017. Now, you'll find articles today about this. When I was looking for some to talk about this, I found plenty of articles just released in the last week or so. So it says Plymouth Colony planned as collectivist utopia. In the New World, they wanted to erect a new Jerusalem that would not only be religiously devout, but be built on a new foundation of communal sharing and social altruism. Their goal was the communism of Plato's Republic, in which all would work and share in common, knowing neither private property nor self-interested acquisitiveness. By the way, folks, on this idea of altruism as well, the church was willing to give to people. If you look at the early church and the writings, Clement of Alexandria very specifically comes to my mind, talks about, a Christian's neighbor is not in want or need because he's always providing for him. The early church took things very seriously and to the utmost extreme. I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all, but they were very, very different than what we think of today as people within the church. And the Bible itself, the scriptures, aren't quite that extreme. And like I said, Paul gives examples. The church had no problem helping out people, but they believed that essentially people needed to work. They needed to keep busy. It's the idea that idle hands are the devil's playground, right? That's not in the Bible is specifically, by the way, but it is a truism, if you would, in that when you're bored, you're going to get into nonsense and into trouble. I think one of the reasons why we have a huge amount of porn addiction in the United States is because, um, the frankly, we have a lot of leisure time, and people are addicted to their technology. Um, and so you get bored, you do whatever, and then people start, instead of interacting with others and instead of being productive, they start doing non-productive things. It happens to all of us. And so for an average person, they need something to occupy their time. And in fact, human beings are more or less beasts of burden. We need work for meaning. In part, I'm doing this now because I don't have full time work, and this uh, gives me some sort of purpose and meaning to provide information, to give a voice to the world, and provide perspectives and education to people from things that I've learned over the years, and things I don't often hear talked about from certain perspectives. Let's see here. But again, the church wasn't just willing to just give money to any random person, biblically speaking. Later, it was a bit different. What resulted is recorded in the diary of Governor William Bradford, the head of the colony. The colonists collectively cleared and worked the land, and they brought forth neither the bountiful harvest they had hoped for, nor did they create a spirit of shared and cheerful brotherhood. The less industrious members of the colony came late to their work in the fields and were slow and easy in their labors. This is what happens. Go work at FedEx, guys. Go be a package handler. It's a fun job. It is brutal, though. I was good at it. I was fast. I like hard work. I like physical labor. Um, I would see dudes. I would be getting crushed, and I would see dudes go sitting in the corner taking a break, um, trying to keep an eye out for the boss while they didn't work. Of course, there are cameras in the docks and the trailers watching you, so it's absolutely silly. But yeah, a lot of people aren't willing to work hard. It's just how it is. I'm not the most industrious person myself. It depends on what we're talking about, but you have to understand that this is a personality thing. This is why certain people do so much better than others. That's why certain people on the interwebs, on YouTube or other video platforms, put out more content than others. It's why certain people get richer than others, unlike the utopian belief that we're all exactly the same and socialism works and everyone's going to be creative and do whatever. No, it doesn't happen when people live off welfare either, folks. I've seen it time and time again. In fact, I've helped people who live on welfare, who had food stamps. I've helped them out. I've had them live in my house, and I've seen them be lazy and not even try or attempt to improve their lives. And you might say, well, that's not the norm. It's not everybody. It is more people than you believe. It's far more people than you believe. So it says, knowing that they and their families were to receive an equal share of whatever the group produced, they saw little reason to be more diligent in their efforts. The harder working among the colonists became resentful that their efforts would be redistributed to the more malingering members of the colony. Soon they, too, were coming late to work and were less energetic in the fields. And malingering is something I also have seen working in corrections and the military. And that's what Bradford is talking about here in this particular quote. And here it says, for the young men that were able and fit for labor and service did repine that they should spend their time and strength to work for other men's wives and children without recompense. The strong, or men of parts, had no more division of food, clothes, etc., than he that was weak and not able to do a quarter the other could. This was thought injustice. The aged and graver men were to be ranked and equalized in labor and food, clothing, etc., with the meager and younger sort thought it some indignant and disrespect unto them. and for men's wives to be commanded to do service for others men, as dressed their meat, washing their clothes, etc. I've read this. It says they deemed it a kind of slavery, neither could husbands brook it. So this is translated a little bit more into modern English, but look, man, if you work harder than somebody else and they get paid the same, you're going to kind of feel a little annoyed about that, right? Why should you try so hard when someone else can sit over there in the corner? And you might go, oh, well, Bill, it's just right. It's just that those people, they can't do, can't they? Because all of a sudden, when different measures were put into place, they did do. Now, there is a biblical parable, and Christ talks about a laborer, a man who owned a field, hiring people, and he paid them all the same wage. And one of the people complained, well, you hired me earlier and I worked all day long. And someone else came in late to the party. They only worked a few hours. And they said, well, why do I get paid the same as them? And he said, I already negotiated the wage with you. You decided this, and you should go on with your day. You got the wage you deserved because it's what you decided we agreed upon, period. And what the parable it really is about is people coming into the faith late in the game. Like, whether it be on their deathbed or later in life or whenever it was. And this other person being like, I've been this servant for you forever. Don't I deserve more? Well, Christ said that those that would make themselves the least would become the greatest, meaning those who would humble themselves would become the greatest. And according to scriptures and early church beliefs, there were tiers of reward in the next life after the resurrection. But make no mistake, that parable is not a gospel of socialism. It's not a idea that, oh, we should all get paid the same or anything else. No. There's another parable, which you could say contradicts that, of the unjust steward, who was basically trying to reconcile his master's debts, and he kind of knew he was in trouble because he didn't do his job well. And so he, using his cunning later on, he undercut the debts and got them paid off or paid down and made some money for his master. And Christ was saying that, realize that those who aren't even in the faith, they're cunning, and you won't even think this way as a Christian, as the term Christian didn't exist then. In fact, originally it was a pejorative. But anyways, you won't think this way. You won't seek to use your cunning and intellect. You'll just go along and, be lazy and not do the right thing, and at least make an attempt or try. And this is also a reminder of the parable of the talents. A talent was being was a coin at the time. It was money. And interesting, it's where we get our English word talent, our skills, our inborn natural gifts, right? And they were given different amounts. One was given 5, I think, another 3, and then one was given 1 talent. Well, the other 2 doubled their money, and then they were given a reward. But the third one, he only had 1, and he buried it in a field. And he came back to his master, and he's like, you silly, silly fool. You buried your talent in the field. And he's like, well, master, I knew that you were harsh. And he's like, yeah, but you also know that at least if you would have tried, you would have been all right. And he was like, you get nothing. You're out of here. And again, that's a reflection of effort and the striving that you should be doing if you're in the faith, or just in general, psychologically as a human being, man. Like, grow yourself. But anyways, back to the matter at hand here. It says, because of the disincentives and resentments that spread amongst the population, crops were scarce, and The ration equal shares from the collective harvest were not enough to ward off starvation and death. 2 years of communism in practice left alive only a fraction of the original number of the Plymouth colonies. And then it talks about private property incentive and goes into what I've already read about assigning them their own land and them having to work for themselves. Because, Mother Nature is the best corrector of things. There is a Christian principle, of course, of helping those out who cannot help themselves. There'd be the mentally disabled, the truly crippled, and in the day, widows, because they often did not own property. Um, Although women could own property in the Roman world, folks, don't make any mistakes about it. But orphans because they had no parents to take care of them, that kind of thing. People living in the streets and on the streets. That's what the church focused on, and then focus it on directly people within the church. And then once those folks were taken care of, then you could outreach into the community even more so. That again is just a basic general principle. You take care of your own house before you can help your neighbor out, right? Don't let your house be falling apart and be having holes in your roof and broken windows and whatever else, and you're going down to your neighbors to basically help them do whatever, clean up around their place. Well, you got some home repairs to do first, right? You need to prioritize your time appropriately. So this is from Mises.org, The Great Thanksgiving Hoax. And it talks about the school children thing, blah, blah, blah. The official story of the Pilgrims, the Mayflower, the winter, and establishing Plymouth Colony in the winter of 1620, 1621. This first winter is hard, and half the colonists die, but the survivors are hard-working and tenacious, and they learn new farming techniques from the Indians. The harvest of 1621 is bountiful. The Pilgrims hold a celebration and give thanks to God. This is not what happened. The official story then has the Pilgrims living more or less happily ever after each year. No. The problem with this official story is that the harvest of 1621 was not bountiful, nor were the colonists hardworking or tenacious. 1621 was a famine year, and many of the colonists were lazy thieves. In his history of Plymouth Plantation, the governor and the colony, William Bradford reported that the colonists went hungry for years because they refused to work in the field. They preferred instead to steal food. Mind you, not everyone who was in the colony was a Puritan. Some of them were merchants and military type men. So different kind of religious beliefs. They all probably would have believed in the Christian God in general. But the Puritans were a different breed, is all I'm trying to say. They preferred instead to steal. He says that the colony was riddled with corruption and with confusion and discontent. The crops were small because much was stolen both by night and day before it became scarce edible. In the harvest feast of 1621 and 22, all had their hunger bellies filled, but only briefly. The prevailing condition during those years was not the abundance the official story claims. It was famine and death. The first Thanksgiving was not so much a celebration as it was a last meal of condemned men. Yeah, because it was the harvest. And that's why we celebrate Thanksgiving now, folks, at this time of year. But in subsequent years, something changed. The harvest of 1623 was different. Suddenly, instead of famine now, God gave them plenty, Bradford wrote, and the face of things was changed and rejoiced in the hearts of many, for which they blessed God. Thereafter he wrote, any general want or famine hath not been amongst them since to this day. In fact, in 1624, so much food was produced that the colonists were able to begin exporting corn, meaning they became a viable colony that could trade back to the British colonies across the world. What happened? After the poor harvest of 1622, Bradford writes, they began to think how they might raise as much corn as they could and obtain a better crop. They began to question their form of economic organization. This had required that all profits and benefits that are got by trade, trafficking, trucking, working, fishing, and any other means were to be placed in the common stock of the colony, and that all such persons as are of this colony are to have their meat, drink, apparel, and all provisions out of the common stock. And did not work well. Did not work well at all. To rectify the situation, in 1623, Bradford abolished socialism. The word socialism, by the way, did not exist then, but it was what it was, right? He gave each household a parcel of land and told them they could keep what they produced or trade in any way they saw fit. In other words, he replaced socialism with free market, and that was the end of famines. And then it talks about Jamestown. This is a really interesting thing because Jamestown sort of went through this and they had a starving times, but Jamestown has nothing to do with Thanksgiving, folks. You're going to see this in this Slate article. It is ridiculous. Jamestown has nothing to do with the idea of Thanksgiving in Plymouth. It was a different colony and different rules, different people, not the Cape Cod Plymouth colony. So, Slate, the People's Republic of Plymouth, the strange and persistent right-wing myth that Thanksgiving celebrates the Pilgrims' triumph over socialism. It's not a myth. You can go read William Bradford's writings, every single ounce of it, and make up your own mind. There's no myth. But what we're about to see is some ideological historicity here. Historical rewriting or excusing or whatever. November 25th, 2014. Down with the commies, let us eat. That's pretty funny, actually. I like that. This Thursday, Americans will gather together for an evening of family, food, football, and arguing with relatives about politics. Blah, 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 blah. The storyline goes like this. The early settlers of Plymouth first experiment with a system of collective ownership and farmland, which, as with their compatriots at Jamestown, led to widespread famine. When they were eventually abandoned the system in favor of private ownership, farmers were more productive, the harvest was bountiful, and feast was held in celebration past the stuffing. Well, according to William Bradford, yes. All right, that's it. I'm done. End of show, right? No. Can't do that. This tale has its roots in the Cold War. Let us be thankful for this value lesson from our fathers and yielding temptations of socialism. Advised in a 1968 column in the popular mid-century conservative newspaper columnist Henry Hazlitt. Hazlitt did talk about it. It's not based in that. It's based in the writings of William Bradford. The notions of Thanksgiving as an anti-socialist parable has been given new life with the rise of the Tea Party. Those terrible people who want a legitimate constitutional government and want to be left alone. My Lord. So evil. With visions of reappearing on conservative and libertarian blogs. Blah, 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 blah. I don't really care to read all this. Yeah, it points out some stuff. That talks about some radio show host, whatever. You go read this for yourself. I'm going to skip down a little bit. The idea, which has the twin virtues of reaffirming the wisdom of the free market system and discounting the modern multiculturalist notion that the Pilgrims succeeded with the help of Native Americans, is rooted in historical accounts. It has some flaws, though. Well, if you guys want to get to it, you want to stick along, I have some Wampanoag Indian accounts, Native American accounts. But let's not worry about that. Kate Zernike, I don't know, of the New York Times pointed out in 2010 the timeline doesn't quite work. The first Thanksgiving was celebrated in 1621. The system of collective ownership, known as the Common Course, was abandoned in 1623. Yes! And they starved in 1621. What did I just read you? Oh, what was this over here? But in subsequent years, something changed. The harvest of 1623 was different. Instead of famine, now God gave them plenty. This is just absurd, guys. Like, Slate is absurd. And it was abandoned not because of famine, but because the settlers wanted to make more money. Really? Now, Valmises.org, the author of this, who is the author? Richard J. Maybury. He may be taking Bradford out of context here. But, I have this really cool thing right here. It's called the interwebs, and I can go to this interwebs library and roll and scroll down here, and you can go to the year of 1621, which I have pulled up right here. You can read all about 1621. You can read about 1623. You can read about afterwards. Somehow that pulled up 1624. Doesn't matter, guys. You can look at this for yourself. This here that is highlighted is a nonsensical lie. As for Jamestown, their biggest problem were drought and malaria, not socialism. No, Jamestown, it wasn't just drought and malaria. They had problems with workers too, because they were mostly merchants. The Pilgrims were seeking out something else. And look, guys, it's not easy to just pick up and move today. It's not that hard. But imagine doing this, crossing the Atlantic Ocean on a wooden ship. And I've crossed the Atlantic Ocean on a steel ship, on a big old DSL as a infantry marine in a mech unit. And the crossing, the first crossing we had pitch and rolls that were ridiculous. Like, we went through a storm and the ship was doing this stuff. It was like, and you're walking from one side to the other, and then it pitches up and slams back down and whatever else. Almost everybody was seasick. I got a little bit of a headache from it, but yeah, you'd be sitting somewhere, or we go to a little media room around the corner from my berthing, the little housing unit you live in, and you go watch a movie, and all the chairs start sliding across the room. And guys, these people did it on ships that weren't even pressurized. Modern day ships are pressurized to keep air pressure the same. Very, very hard. And very little backup. It wasn't easy to get another ship to bring them supplies. They had to go off on their own and homestead. Let's see. It says, it is true that the Plymouth settlers abandoned a system of common ownership in favor of private property, but found it much more to their liking. In his memoirs, William Bradford, the colony's first governor, writes that the communal lifestyle was found to breed much confusion and discontent and retard much employment for the younger men, and that were most able and fit for labor and services, did repine that they should spend their time and strength to work for other men's wives and children without recompense. Again, I've read this. We can read it over and over again. You just counteracted your narrative right here. Also, they were starving in 1621. There is a true story here. This is a garbage paper. And then it goes on to talk about, well, this was common back in the day and all that kind of stuff. And then, is Halliburton a socialist scheme? It gets into this whole other justification of modern day stuff. No, it was socialism, guys. Like, I read you way back here that Bradford compared this to, where's it at up top here? Plato's Republic. The vanity and conceit of Plato's Republic. This is a centralized, top-down economy, authoritarian economy. It does not work. Decentralization provides for stability because the collective, left alone, creates more, right? You have more independent spirit. You have more desire and more drive. Individuals working together as individuals is more important than the hive mind and everyone working the same. And leftists cannot figure this out. And they don't understand. They have all these utopian ideas that somehow it's going to make life perfect because you get the one genius and you get a couple geniuses to just tell everyone what to do. They think freedom is dangerous. And the reality is that they are actually the ones who are dangerous. So this is from India Country Today and the Wampanoag Thanksgiving experience. I'm going to skip down here a little bit because it goes through that whole story thing again a little bit. We know we're taught in mainstream schools, so it was a political thing. Yes, it was a public relations. It's kind of a genius. It was a way, yeah, whatever. So what really happened? The true story of Thanksgiving starts with a treaty. The leader of our nation at the time, Yellow Feather, or Massasoit, I believe is how you pronounce his name, made a treaty with John Carver, the first governor of the colony. They elected an official, and they were still on the boat. They had their charter. They were still under the jurisdiction of the King of England, and at least that's what they told us. Yes, of course they were. So they couldn't make a treaty for a boatload of people, so they made a treaty between two nations, England and the Wampanoag Nation. What did the treaty say? It basically said we let them be there, and we would protect them against any enemies, and they would protect us from any of ours. If we can go here, I don't know if this article links. Yes, it says 404 not found. Okay, but says it basically said that we would protect them, they would protect us. And this commemorative coin basically said, I'll watch your back, you watch mine agreement. Later on, we collaborated on jurisdictions and created a system so that we could live together. What is the Mashpee version of the 1621 meal? It says, we've probably heard a story of how Squanto assisted in their planning of corn. As far as we know, that was true. Squanto had been taken as a slave, and he learned English, and he happened to, if I remember correctly, he happened to just be there when the Pilgrims had shown up. And because there had been explorers in the Americas before, in North America, there had been disease introduced that the natives had no immunity to include smallpox. And many of them died, not purposefully, by the way. That happened later. That whole blanket germ warfare thing, largely a leftist myth. It did happen to some degree, but not like they say. So the land was ready to be tilled because the nations that lived there at the time were agrarian. In fact, they were more advanced than the natives the further west you went. The further west you went, the more hunter-gatherer they became, and often the less clothes that they wore. But here on the east coast of the United States, especially amongst the Iroquois nations, there were highly developed societies. So it says, so this was their first successful harvest, and they were celebrating the harvest and planning a day of Thanksgiving. That was the kind of like what some of the Arab nations do celebrate by shooting guns in the air. So they started shooting guns, apparently. So this is what was going on over there in Plymouth, the shooting of the guns and the cannons as a celebration, which alerted us because we didn't know they were shooting. So Massasoit gathered up some 90 warriors and showed up at Plymouth preparing to engage, see what was happening, and if they were taking any of her people. They didn't know. It was, in fact, it was a fact-finding mission. They arrived and explained through a translator that they were celebrating the harvest, so we decided to stay and make what was sure and true. Now, by the way, just because they celebrated the harvest doesn't mean that the harvest was bountiful. We can read Bradford's words. It was not until 1623. So it goes on. Even the Vikings had been here, so we wanted to make sure that we decided to camp nearby for days. They just wanted to make sure things were cool. During those days, the men went out to hunt and gathered food, deer, duck, geese, and fish. There are 90 men here, and at the time, I think there were only 23 survivors of that boat. Right? Most of the people had died. There were 23 survivors, the Mayflower. So you can imagine the fear. You have armed natives who are camping nearby. The colonists, were always vulnerable to new land, new creatures, even the trees. There was no such trees in England at the time. People forgot they had just landed here. This coastline looked very different from what it looks like now. And their culture, new foods, blah, blah, blah. And basically saying we were just kind of there. So the Pilgrims didn't invite the Wampanoags to sit down and eat turkey and drink some beer. Oh no, well, let's put it this way. People did eat together, but not in what is portrayed as the first Thanksgiving. It was our homeland and our territory, and we walked all through their village at the time. The difference is how they behaved and how they ate and how they prepared things was a lot for both cultures to work with each other. Both in those days, it was sort of like today when you go out on a boat in open sea and see another boat and everyone is waving and friendly. It's because they're vulnerable and need to rely on each other if something happens. In those days, the English really needed to rely on us, and yes, they were polite and best they could be, but they regarded us as savage nonetheless. Well, you were culturally, or at least as far as your technology goes, far more primitive than European societies. You had no stone buildings or anything like that. You had no fully erected buildings. You hadn't invented the wheel. You hadn't developed any sort of steel weapons. Technologically, the Europeans were light years ahead of you. And I'm not sure if they even had written language. So let's look at just the reality of it. It's not an insult. People develop at different times and periods in throughout world history. Different cultures develop differently. We know that. But there is a certain kind of course along the way in which it takes. So you did eat together at times, but not the legendary Thanksgiving meal. No, we were there for days, and this is another thing. We gave thanks more than once a year in formal ceremony for different seasons, and the green corn Thanksgiving for the arrival of certain fish species, whales, and the first snow of our New Year's in May, and ceremonies, and yada, yada, yada. What are the Mashpee Wampanoags taught about Thanksgiving now? Most of us are taught about the friendly Indians and the friendly Pilgrims, and people sitting down and eating together. They really don't go into any depth about it as a period of time in history, Thanksgiving, and what it was going on in the 1620s. It was a whole different mindset. There was always focus on food because people had to work hard and go out and forage for food, not the way it is now. I can remember being in Oklahoma amongst a lot of different tribal people when I was a junior in junior college and Thanksgiving was coming around and I couldn't come home. It was too far and too expensive. And people were talking about Thanksgiving and yeah, the Indians. And I said, yeah, we're the Wampanoags. They didn't know. We're not even taught what kind of Indians, hopefully in the future, at least for Americans, we do need to get a lot brighter about other people. And yeah, it's just another perspective. But let's realize, folks, the reality is that Thanksgiving is celebrated because of the harvest, but much later, largely because of the abandonment of communism and socialism, however you want to put it, collectivism, communalism as it's talked about here. And once that was abandoned, they became prosperous. They became so prosperous that they actually had extra goods that they could then become more prosperous and wealthy with. They could send out to other people. And it doesn't matter how many times this happens throughout history. You always have some fool trying to say, well, communism's never been tried. Socialism's never been tried. Well, the theory says, I don't care about your imaginary theories that have never been tested or tried. I only care about the practicality of what has worked. And by the way, Thanksgiving is not the only example of socialism going awry throughout history. Now, our tribal societies socialistic. Yes, families are. Absolutely. But that was the exact problem that these people had. The families are socialistic. And these people that didn't have families had to provide for these families. And then the wife had to go, of this other guy, had to go work with this man. And who knows what his intentions were. And the wives felt degraded because they wanted to be taking care of their own children and their husbands. And the husbands felt disrespected, and then the workers felt disrespected because they went out and worked and labored hard, and they're like, why are you doing this? And this is just kind of how human beings operate, folks. It's also very important to understand that in our highly, highly wealthy and luxurious society, and I mean, folks, I don't live in a big home. I'm you know, we're a middle class household, and I mean lower middle class, but we do all right. But like, we still have a lot of luxury. Like I can just walk right over here, and I have a bathroom. My dad, born in the 50s, had to go outside to an outhouse. And a lot of people around the world still have to do that. Um, I lived in the desert for over 2 months without a shower. Um, just gross, gross conditions. I can tell you that all these people that believe that socialism is the key have never, one, experienced or lived anything having to do with socialism, and two, they're ungrateful. I also think they have dark hearts, and a lot of them might just be naive, don't get me wrong, but they're very ungrateful. Many of them are jealous about what you have, and they don't. So let's reflect on history, not just the last 100 years, which is what we normally do, is we just look at modern history. But let's go further back. Let's go back thousands of years. Maybe I'll do a bit on the 40 centuries of wage and price control here coming up soon. Um, but let's also think as we go in, and hopefully you don't listen to these draconian orders from governors, and you go to your families, and let's reflect about our great abundance and our great wealth, and give true thanks that we're able to do these things, even in these trying times. So with all that, folks, this has been AllMinucOne. Hey, I will be live later over on D Live. The ends underscores justify the memes. We will probably be live on YouTube. The ends justify the memes. Hopefully, my partner Tank and my producer has got all that worked out, and we will be trying to go live on there again. That is, our first show was kind of canceled right away. We don't know why, but his mic was out, and we actually had that problem last week. His mic, for some reason, went out for a little bit. And then, of course, I always got to say, I do have a subscribe star if you want to help out. By the way, there are links over on the D Live page. But with all of that, that's all I got. Happy Thanksgiving, y'all. Be safe. Don't let the crazy news going around get you down. The election stuff, don't let it get you down. And go spend time with your family. And remember how good you have it. That you don't have to watch people starve to death. That you do live in luxury. That you have an abundance of freedom. That you don't have to fight for your life, potentially, from invading enemies. And I know that's happening more and more in the United States, but it's still nothing like what it once was centuries ago, or how life was, centuries ago, where people might raid your home or village and rape your wife and take your children as slaves. Like, be thankful that you live in this time, in this period, even though sometimes it is dark and confusing and strange and whatever else it is. So, guys, I'll leave you on that. Happy Thanksgiving and be well.